Hey Ginge, haven't recorded one of these in a while, but I told you I didn't forget. Well, I've had a harrowing fucking day so far. Went out earlier to take her for a walk and to get some coffee because the roads finally like warmed up enough to where I could get my car out onto them, whatever. That was fine. Had to abandon it at the train yard turnaround because the Honda Fit, I've taken to calling her the other woman. That's my car's name now. I haven't thought about it so much until recently because she's been a part of my life and the adventures I have been having that cannot be discounted or left undiscussed. So, yes, so I had to leave the other woman at the train yard and me and this one walked home, yes we did, in the slush and the slurry up to our ankles and on the side of Highway 30, yes we did. This is all true and it happened today. And made it home. Luckily, it was a brief walk, still harrowing as there, semi trucks and Jeeps and lifted trucks and, other big rigs and just vehicles in general, just like flying past. We made it. And I've just kind of been puttering, definitely too terrified to leave my house or do anything after that. And what could I do? Walk where? Back to my car? No. So, whatever. So, yes. I know these are supposed to be relaxing. Now this is just like dumping because you're the only one that watches them. I hate this angle too. Let's do some recon. Ginge. Tell me, how's everything in DC? Let me know. Okay. See what we can do. She's judging me back there. She's like, you should have thought this through a little bit better before you did it. Well, that's not what today is about. It's Christmas Eve, okay? So cut me some slack. That's better, I guess. It's a little dark in here because I had that lamp on back there. But it was far too bright and like glinty. So now this has been like 3 minutes of incessant rambling. What I wanted to read here is a story that kind of like recalibrates me and sets me back to equilibrium after ridiculousness or like I'm just like generally out of whack. It's from, well, what I'm reading it from is the Best American Short Stories collection from the year 2000, my birth year, just in case you wanted to know. And it's by one Miss Amy Bloom, and it's called The Story. And let's see, how many pages is it? It's not super long, but it is several pages. I might split this into multiple parts dependent on where I want to stop reading. I might not. We'll see where it goes. I love this story. This is one of my stories that I think is like a non-negotiable. Like, don't go through life without having read this story. And it's funny too. I find that this happens to me with authors rather. I do not believe that one Miss Amy Bloom is known for short stories. I could be wrong, so don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure she's more into the like historical novel kind of jazz, like realistic fiction kind of novels. Historical. She wrote something, the name's escaping me. She wrote something that I'm pretty sure was like historical something that got a lot of buzz and a lot of press however many years ago. And started some sort of writing fellowship at a university or like a program. I don't even know what fellowship means. I don't know why that flew out of my mouth. Anyways. But I find myself doing this with authors. Like I'll find one of their stories, a short story usually, or novel, whatever. I'll fall in love with it, and I find out that they've never written anything like it ever again, and it's not what they write, and it's not what they're known for, and it's not their shtick. It's kind of like how the first JCO novel I ever read was A Widow's Story, or A Widow's Tale, the nonfiction, full-length nonfiction novel she wrote after her husband's passing. And I was like, wow, I love this, and like devoured it. It was like however many pages, like quite a long read. And I found out that she like doesn't do nonfiction. She's like a fiction gal through and through. And I was like, oh, my intro to you was not what you normally write. However, I enjoyed it thoroughly. So I could be wrong. I don't think she's like mega known for short stories. Maybe she has others. I haven't read any of them, but this short story is one of my non-negotiables. So here goes. The story by one Miss Amy Bloom. You wouldn't have known me a year ago. A year ago, I had a husband, and my best friend was Margie Ann at the post office. In no time at all, my husband got cancer, house prices tumbled in our part of Connecticut, and I got a new best friend. Realtor signs came and went in front of the house down the road, from the elegant forest green and white, for sale by owner, nicely handmade to show that they were in no hurry and in no need, to Martha Bray Lewis and Company realtors, who sold only very expensive houses and rode horses in the middle of the day when there was nothing worthwhile on the market, and then down to the big national relocator company's fiberboard sign, practically shouting, "Fire sale, you can have this house for less than they paid for it." My place was nothing special compared to my neighbors, but it did have the big stained glass windows Ethan had made. So beautiful, sightseers drove right up our private road, parked by the birches, and begged to come in, just to stand there in the rays of purple and green light, to be charmed by twin red-headed mermaids flanking the front door, to run their fingers over the cobalt blue drops sprayed across the hall, bezel set into the plaster. They stood between the cantering, cinnabar legs of the centaur in the middle of the kitchen wall inside. After coffee and cookies, they would order 2 windows or 6 or 9, or one time. Wild with real estate money, people from Gramercy Park ordered a dozen botanical panels for the new house in Madison, and Ethan always said, "Why do you do that?" I did it for company and for money, since I needed both, and Ethan didn't care. When he asked for the mail without looking up, or even when he made the effort to ask about my bad knee, not noticing that we'd last spoken 2 full days ago, it was worse than the quiet. If I didn't ask the New Yorkers for money, he'd shuffle around in his moccasins, picking at his nails until they made an insulting offer, or get back in their cars, baffled and rich. 6 months after Ethan caught cancer like a terrible cold and died, I went just once to the Unitarian Widows group, in which all the late husbands were much nicer than mine. And even the angriest woman only said, "God damn his smoking." And I thought, his smoking? Almost all that I liked about Ethan was his stained glass, his small, wide hands, and the fact that he was willing to marry plain Jane me when I thought no one would, and willing to stay by me when I lost the baby. That was such a bad time, I didn't leave the house for 2 months, and Ethan invited the New Yorkers in just to get me out of bed. Other than that, I only thought that if you didn't hate your silent, moody husband after 20 years, and he didn't seem to hate you and your big blob of despair, you could call it a good thing. No worse than other marriages. That last month was like the honeymoon we never took, and when strangers talk to me now, I sound like a woman who lost her beloved and grieves still. I have dead parents, the best kind, I think, at this stage of life. 2 sisters, whom I do love at a little distance. A garden that is as close to God as I need it to be, and a book group I've been in for 14 years, which also serves as a mastectomy hotline, menopause watch, and PFLAG. I don't mind being alone, having been raised by hard-drinking, elderly parents, a German and a Swede, with whom I never had a fight or a moment's pleasure, and I took off for college at 16 with no idea of what to say to these girls with outerwear for every season, fall coats and spring jackets and pale blue anoraks, and underwear that was nicer than my church clothes. Having made my own plain, dark way, and having been with plain, dark, but talented Ethan such a long time, I've been pleasantly surprised in middle age to have yoga and gardening for my soul, and bookkeeping to pay the bills. Clearly, my whole life was excellent training for money managing of all kinds, and now I do the books for 20 people like Ethan, gifted and without a clear thought in their heads. about organizing their finances or feeding their families, if they're lucky enough to have more than a tiny profit to show for what they do. I didn't call my new neighbors the Gold Dust Twins. Margie-Ann, our postmaker, called them that. She nicknamed all the New Yorkers and pre-read their magazines and kept the catalogs that most appealed to her. Tall, blonde, gorgeous, she said. And gobs of money, she said, just gobs of money. And Mr. Goldust had a little sense, but she had none. And they had a pretty little blonde baby who would grow up to be hell on wheels if the mother didn't stop giving her Coca-Cola at 9 in the morning and everything else she asked for. And they surely needed a bookkeeper, Margie-Ann said, because Dr. Mrs. Goldust was a psychiatrist, and he did something mysterious in the import and export of art. I could tell just from that they would need me. The kind of bookkeeper and accountant and paid liar who could call black white and look you straight in the eye. I put my business card in their mailbox, which they, I assumed she, had covered in bits of fluorescent tile, making a rowdy little work of art. And they called me that night. She invited themselves over for coffee on Sunday morning. Oh my God, this house is gorgeous, completely charming. And that stained glass. You're a genius, Mrs. Baker. Mrs.? Not Ms.? Is Janet all right? This is unbelievable. Oh my God. And your garden, unbelievable. Miranda, don't touch the art. Let Mommy hold you up to the light, like a fairy story. Sam smiled and put out his hand, my favorite kind of male hand, what I would call shapely peasant. Auburn hairs on the fist joint of each finger and just a little ginger patch on the back. His hands must have been left over from early Irish farmers. The rest of him looked right out of a magazine. I know I'm carrying on, but I can't help it. Sam, darling, darling, please take Miranda so Janet and I can just explore for 2 minutes. We walked out to the Centauri's. I don't know how you pronounce that. Centauri's? And she brushed her long fingers against their drooping blue fringe. That gives me no clue. Can I touch? I'm not much of a gardener. That card of yours was just a gift from God. Not because of the bookkeeping, but because I wanted to meet you after I saw you in town. I don't think you had seen me at the Dairy Mart. I had seen her, of course. Sam, Janet has forgiven me for being such a loony. Maybe she'll help us out of our financial morass. Sam smiled and scooped Miranda up just before she smacked into the coffee table corner. He said he would leave the two of us to it, and any help at all would be better than what he had currently. He pressed my hands together in his and put 2 files between them, hard, clear plastic with Mobay Exports Incorporated embossed across the front, and a manila folder with stationery from Dr. Sandra Saunders sticking out of it. I sent them away with blueberry jam and a few begonia cuttings. Coming from New York, she thought any simple thing you could do in a garden was wonderful. Sandra called, I can tell Miranda's fallen in love with you. Could you possibly watch her tomorrow, around 5, just for a half hour? Sam has to go to the city. After 2 tantrums, juice instead of Coke, stories instead of videos, and no to her organdy dress for playing in the sandbox, it was 7 o'clock, then 8. I gave Miranda dinner and a bath. She was, in fact, a very sweet child, and I thought that her mother, like mine, meant well, but seemed not to have what was called for. When Sandra came home, Miranda ran to her, but looked out between her legs and blew me a kiss. Say, we love you, Janet, Sandra said. We love you, Janet. Say, please come tomorrow for drinks, Janet. Miranda sighed. Drinks, Janet, she said indulgently. I kissed them both goodbye. I had never had such fresh, sweet skin under my lips. Miranda's peach and Sandra's apricots and cream moisturizer. And although I wasn't attracted to women or girls, I could see why a person would be. I planted a small square garden near Sam's studio, Sweet William, Campanula, and violet queen asters with a little rosemary bonsai that Miranda could put her pinky-sized plastic babies around. Sandra was gone more than Sam was. He worked in the converted barn with computers and screens and 2 faxes and 4 phone lines, and every time I visited, he brought me a cup of tea and admired our latest accomplishments. He said, it's very good of you to do this. I don't mind, I said. We could always get a sitter, he said. But he knew I knew that wasn't true because I had done their books. Can I say that the husband was not any kind of importer? Can I say that he was what he really was, a successful cartoonist? That they lived right behind me in a house I still find too big and too showy even now that I am in it? I haven't even described the boyfriend, the one Sandra went to canoe with while I babysat. Should I write him as tall and blonde when in fact he was dark and muscular like the husband? It would be too confusing for readers if both men are dark and fit, with long ponytails, but they both were. And they drove the same kind of truck, making for more confusion. I've given them blandly wholesome modern names, wishing for the days of Aunt Ada Starkadder and Martin Chuzzlewit and Pompeo Laganima. Sorry, Ginge. Sam's real name conveys more of his rather charming shy stiffness and rectitude, but I keep Sam. Which was the advantage of suggesting an unlikely misleading blend of Jewish and New England. And I'll call the boyfriend Joe, suggesting a general good-natured lunkishness. Is this even gonna go out? I've mispronounced like every fucking word. Oh my god. Good thing you're the only one watching, Ginge. Sandra, as I've named her, actually was a therapist, just as I've written her, but not a psychiatrist, and I disliked her so much I can't make you bear to think, even in this story, that she had the discipline and drive and intellectual persistence to become a physician. She had nothing but appetite and brass balls, and she was the worst mother I ever saw. Even now, I regard her destruction as a very good thing, which may undermine the necessary fictive texture of deep ambiguity, the roiling ambivalence that gives tension to the narrator's affection. Sandy pinched her child for not falling asleep quickly enough. She gave her potato chips for breakfast and Slurpees for lunch. She cut her daughter's hair with pinking shears and spent $200 she didn't have on her own monthly Madison Avenue haircuts. She left the child in more stores than I can remember, cut cocaine on her changing table, and blamed the poor little thing for every disappointment and heartache in her own life, until Miranda's eyes welled up at the sound of her mother calling her name. And if Sandy was not evil, she was worse than foolish and sick, and more to the point, incurable. If Sandra were smushed inside a wrecked car, splattered against the inside of a tunnel, I wouldn't feel even so sad for her as I did for Princess Diana, for whom I felt very little indeed. I think the opening works, and the part about the widows group is true, although I've left out the phone call I got a week after the group met, when the nicest widow, an oversized stalker Channing, invited me to a dinner with unmistakable overtones, and I didn't go. I wish I had gone. That dinner and its aftermath might make a better story than this one I've been fooling with. I don't want to leave out the time Sandra got into a fist fight with Joe's previous girlfriend, who knocked Sandra down into the middle of her own potato salad at the Democrats' annual picnic, or the time Joe broke into the former marital home after Sandra moved out and threw Sam's library into the fire, not realizing that he was also destroying Sandra's collection of first editions. And when he was done, drunk and sweating, I sat on my porch, watching through my late husband's binoculars. Ethan is very much my late husband, a sculptor, not a glassmaker, but correct in the essentials of character. My husband wasn't dead before I met them. He died a year later, and Sam was very kind, and Sandra was her usual charming, useless self. I saw Joe trip on little Miranda's Fisher-Price roller skate and slide down the ravine. I went to sleep, and when Sam called me the next day, laughing and angry, watching an ambulance finally come up his long gravel drive and the EMTs put splints all over Joe the boyfriend, I laughed too and brought over corn chowder and my own rye bread for Sam and Miranda. I don't have any salt-of-the-earth type friends like Margie Ann. Margie Ann's are almost always crusty and often black, and frequently given to pungent phrases and earth wisdom. Sometimes they're someone's grandmother. In men's stories, they're either old and disreputable drinking buddies, someone's tobacco-chewing, trout-fishing grandpa, or the inexplicably devoted sidekick of color, caustic and true. My friends in real life are two other writers, the movie critic from our nearest daily newspaper and a retired home and garden freelancer I've been playing tennis with for 20 years. Estelle, my tennis buddy, has more character of the narrator than I do, and I thought I could use her experience with Sandra to make a storyline. Sandra had sprinkled her psychobabble all over poor Estelle, got her coming 3 times a week, cash on the table, and had almost persuaded her to leave Dev, her very nice husband, in order to explore her full potential. Estelle's entire full potential is to be the superb and good-natured tennis partner she is, a gifted gardener, which is where I got all the horticultural detail, and a poor cook and worse housekeeper for an equally easygoing, rosy-cheeked man who inherited $2 million when he was 50, and about whom I can say nothing worse than at 83, Dev's not quite as sharp as he was, although he's nicer. I cannot imagine how else Estelle's full potential, at 77, with cataracts in her left eye, bad hearing, and not the least interest in art, theater, movies, or politics, would express itself. I persuaded Dev to take her on a fancy cruise, 2 weeks through the canals of France, and when they came back, beaming pinkly, a little chubby, and filled with lively remarks about French bread and French cheese, Estelle said nothing more about her underdeveloped potential and nothing more about meeting with Sandra. I see that I've made Sam sound more affably dodgy than he really is. He wouldn't have caught my eye in the first place if he was no more than the cardboard charmer I described. And he was tougher than Joe, in the end. Even if Sandra hadn't been a bad mother, I might have imagined a complex but rosy future with Sam and Miranda, if I was capable of imagining my future. I don't know what made Sandra think I would be her accomplice. If you are thin and blondely pretty and used to admirers, maybe you see them wherever there are no rivals. But hell, I read the ladies' magazines and drove all the way to Westport for a new haircut, spent money on clothes, and although she didn't notice that I was coming over in silk knit t-shirts and black jeans, Sam did. When Sandra called me, whispering from Joe's bed, "Oh my God, make something up, I lost track of time," I didn't. I walked over with dinner for Sam and Miranda, and while Miranda sat in front of her computer, I said, "I'm a bad liar." Sandra called from Joe's. She asked me to make something up, but I can't. There is no such thing as a good writer and a bad liar. After she moved out, she called me most mornings just to report on the night before. She was in heaven. Joe was wonderful in every way, but terribly jealous of Sam. Very silly, of course, very flattering. I called Joe in the late afternoons. I said, "Oh, Sandy's not there?" "Oh, of course." Joe was possibly the most easily led person God ever made. I didn't even have to drop a line. I just dangled it loosely and flicked. I said, "She's not in the office. She must be at home. I mean, at Sam's. It's great that they're getting along, for Miranda's sake, honestly. I think they're better friends now that they're separated." I did that twice a week, making up different reasons for calling. Joe hit her once. She told me, and I touched the round bruise on her jaw, begging her to press charges, but she didn't. The part where Joe drove his truck into the back of Sam's house is too good to leave out. And it tells funnier than it really was, although the rear end of his pickup sticking out through acres of grape arbor was pretty funny, as was the squish-squish of the grapes as Joe tried to extricate himself, and the smell of something like wine sweeping over us as he drove off, vines twirling around his tires. I reported Sandy to the ethics committee of the Connecticut Association of Family Counselors. All the things she shouldn't have told me. How she did things in her office, and her financial arrangements with her patients, and the stock tips they gave her, and her insistence on being paid in cash in advance. And the fact that I, who was no kind of therapist at all, knew all these things and knew their names, was enough to make them suspend her license for 6 months. Sophisticated readers understand that writers work out their anger, their conflicts, their endless grief, and rolling list of loss through their stories. That, however, means spirited or diabolical. It's only a story. That the darkness in the soul is shaped into type and lies there, brooding and inert, black on the page but active, dangerous, only in the reader's mind. Actually harmless. I am not harmless. The story I'd hoped to write would have skewed her, of course. Anyone who knew her would have read it, known it was her, and thought badly of her while reading. She would have been embarrassed and angry. That really was not what I had in mind. I wanted her skin like a rug on my floor, her slim throat slit, heart still beating behind the newly bricked up wall. In stories, when someone behaves uncharacteristically, we know a meaningful, even pivotal moment has come. If we are surprised too often, we either vacillate or just give up and close the book. In real life, when people think they know you well enough not only to say, "It's Tuesday, she must have been helping out at the library today," but well enough to have said to the librarian after you left the building, You know, she just loves reading to the 4-year-olds. I think it's been such a comfort to her since the little boy died. When they know you like that, you can do almost any bad, secretive thing. And if they hear about it, they will, as readers do, simply disbelieve the narrator. And that is where I'll stop. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's just a little bit left. But I will make a part 2. Love you, Ginge.